Glad to have with us today for panel discussion for our next speaker. Is Steffanie Dohn with the Coastal Community Foundation, and she's going to talk about capital campaigns and strengthening your outreach.
Hi everyone. Is everybody okay? A little stretch. I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, which is money. So that should turn your ears on. Keep your interest. Thank you for having me here. And I have heard that you all might be interested in raising some money. So I thought we could talk about that. So you want to raise some money. Well, who would be your best prospects, do you think, if you wanted to go about setting up or beginning a capital campaign? And actually, back up, who in the room is thinking of launching a capital campaign in the next 10 days? 5 minutes. Or got one, that's good. Okay, so who are your best prospects?
Parishioners.
Parishioners. Okay, one thing I want to impart on you, that a best prospect is not Oprah. Good, then I can know. I say that because I moved here in 2005, and I started out at the Citadel Foundation, and we were in the midst of a $100 million capital campaign. And we were probably at the $75, $80 million mark when I got there. And we had a particular board member who kept bringing up Oprah. And I thought he was joking. And so we went through and we had other prospects, and I went to another job at at Crisis Ministries, where I was Director of Development for the past 5 years before I moved to the Community Foundation. And don't you know, when we talked about a capital campaign, guess who came up? Oprah. And I said, okay, you need to tell me what's with Oprah. I know she's very generous, and she certainly has capacity. She certainly has money to give away, and she gives away a lot of it. But why is this the second time I've heard Oprah? And the answer was, well, she ran the bridge run once. So she immediately went to the top of the prospect list. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it might be, your time might be better spent focusing on somebody else. And those people, you mentioned parishioners, it's probably parishioners, but I'm going to say it might not be those that are tithing right now. And I know that's counterintuitive, but it might be the people that are not giving to you right now. It just might be. So let's step back for a minute and just talk but very basically about capital campaigns and some of the language we use. This campaign, but basics. I'm going to try to answer all your questions about campaigns. I could talk about these things I'm going to put up on this screen forever. So please interject and ask questions, and I will try not to talk about it forever. First and foremost, be prepared. So those of you that are expecting to launch a campaign in the next 5 minutes or 5 days, just hear me out and please be prepared. And what we mean by that is there a need? At the Citadel Foundation, a $100 million campaign, when you walked around that campus, nothing was really falling down. There was nothing that was screaming, need, need, need. It was hard to see that need. I'm not saying it wasn't there, but it was a little difficult. I speak from my experience. I'm going to share some stories with you all. So, but there is a point to them, I promise. At Crisis Ministries, we were preparing for a campaign to build a new shelter. And as I was walking through the current shelter, has anyone been to Crisis Ministries lately? Or at some point since you lived here? Literally holes in the ceiling. Water stain holes in the ceiling. Beautiful, I thought. This is going to be easy because here's the need. You can see it. Sometimes, but my point is that sometimes you can't really see the need. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go and launch a capital why you're thinking about doing a capital campaign. It's not because you're greedy and you want more money, right? It's because there's a real need. So think about what that need is and how would you communicate it to Oprah if you happen to be next to her on the bridge, right? So is there a need? And have everybody know what that is, be on the same page about that, which is harder than you might think sometimes. What is it we really need? And what's included in that need is how much money do we need to raise? Not how much money we think we might need to raise, but how much money do we need to raise? So you can communicate that with your parishioners, with outside sources, with grants prospects, with the community at some point. Any questions about the need? Do you all think you can communicate your need? You have a need? Is there an urgency? Again, back to the Citadel. Students were still coming to the Citadel. There were still cadets. There were the biggest cadets, the biggest class of cadets, record-breaking amounts for the 3 years I was there. People were still coming. We were still having parades every Friday. Why do I need to give you my money right now? Why is it right now that I have to give you my money? Go back to crisis ministries. The ceiling's falling down. It was still hard to make people understand the urgency. Yet it's very important. People have priorities. People have weddings, their children's weddings to plan. They have divorces, other things going on. They made pledges to other capital campaigns. How are you going to make your case, your need, urgent enough for them to act now? And that's something that you as a group, as a congregation, need to communicate and need to agree upon before you start a campaign. You can do it without it, but it'll be a lot harder. It'll take a lot longer. Is there capacity? When you look at your congregation, your parishioners, your supporters, the people that use your facility for outside people that come in and maybe use your meeting space, do they have the capacity, which means do they have the money, frankly, to support your need? So if you need to raise $100 billion, do you have people in your congregation that you can ask them for that? And the saying, you can't squeeze blood from a turnip. Somebody could ask me for $1 million, I couldn't give it to them. There's no possible way. So you need to dig deep into your congregation and find out who your best prospects are, who has the capacity to do that. And sometimes you might need to pay for that. If there was one thing that I've done 4 campaigns in my career, and each organization has invested in some form of a feasibility study. It's been grand, again, higher education, big, huge scale, to very small organizations with a $2 million budget, but we've paid for that feasibility study. And what that does is, it's the same as if you're going to build a building. When you contact a professional, an engineer, an architect, somebody who could tell you what's possible on this site, what is possible to build on this site. It's the same thing. I'm not saying you have to pay somebody to do this feasibility study, to find the people deep in your congregation who are not tithing. They come once in a while, maybe monthly, maybe not. Maybe they say they're a member, but you've never seen them. The professionals can find them and give you an idea of what they might be able to do for you. It doesn't mean they're going to, and there's a long process between figuring out a capacity and asking for a gift. There's a big road to go down before those two meet. Does anybody have a clear idea what I'm talking about with capacity? That's something you want to know before you launch a capital campaign, because you don't want to fail, right? Nobody wants to fail. It might be that once you do a capital campaign, or the feasibility study rather, you can have volunteers do it, you can have a professional do it. We had a mix this crisis ministries. We had about 10 volunteers not paid a lot of money to go and interview a total of 50 people to find out if they had an interest in what we were doing. And some of them said, no, we don't. So we didn't ask them. Some of them, most of them said, I don't know enough to make that decision. I don't know enough to tell you whether I would support that capital campaign or not. And those are the people we focused on. And those are the people you should focus on. Because they might be the people that, they're not the no's, they're not the yeses, but there's a good chunk of them that might be turned into yeses. And don't be afraid to pay for it. And don't be afraid to ask for volunteers to help you with it as well. Is there leadership? I don't mean leadership from the highest decision maker in your congregation. Hopefully they're on board with this project. That's another conversation if they're not. That's another workshop. Hopefully they're on board, they see the need, they know there's an urgency, they know that there's capacity in there somewhere, they know that it's feasible. They're on board with the project. The leadership I'm talking about is, when I think about the organizations I've worked for, there are and currently work for, instantly when I think of leadership, there are 5 or 6 volunteers that pop in my head. And I know that they believe in the need, they see the need, they believe there's urgency, they believe that we can do it, and they're ready to be leaders. So there's leadership. And you all think of 5 people or 1 person in your congregation that you could give this ball to and they would run with it? Yes, no? Hands, yes. Good. Well, that's good. I see the guy who's in the campaign shaking his head with a smile, so that's good. It's good news. So is there leadership? If you can't think of a few people in your mind that would be ready to run with this, you need to back up and start finding some people. And it shouldn't be hard. These are places, this is something that's personal and meaningful, and it shouldn't be hard to find 2 or 3 or 10 or 15 people that are ready to go out and wave this flag for you. And if there's anything that you remember from this conversation when you leave here, or I leave here, please remember this. Be prepared and be honest with yourself. There's nothing worse than failing at a capital campaign. It's very difficult to recover from that. It really is. You've built up the hopes of a lot of people. You've gotten a lot of people on board, and then you fail. And it's hard to recover from that. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's hard, and it's not necessary if you're prepared and you're honest about it. There's no shame in keeping your capital campaign, what we call silent, for a year and a half, before you announce to the world, your parishioners and the world, that you're trying to raise X amount of money. It's better to step back, take a look at all of these things, and if you can, without a doubt, answer, there is a need, there's an urgency, there's capacity, and there's leadership. We have volunteers that are going to go out and talk about this, then you're ready to move forward with a capital campaign. So again, I don't mean to be lecturing, but again, I can talk forever about this. So you have any questions about this part? Or how you know when you're ready? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. I've heard of this concept of the silent capital, and it sounds like an oxymoron.
It does.
Silent capital campaign. But I guess based on what you've said during this phase, you're kind of identifying the people that you think may play a central role, and maybe the people who might, I'll just say, have deep pockets and so on and so forth, to just get a sense of what the lay of the land
Exactly.
might be.
It's you're finding out who are your best prospects. So when you're sitting in a group and someone brings up Oprah, I'm sorry to keep going back to her, but, and I'm going to be very embarrassed if someone knows Oprah and she is indeed a great prospect. But so somebody says you can nod and smile and say, well, we have a list of 12 people who we've spoken with. They're very much interested in this project. They believe in it. They believe in our mission. They believe in our organization. They love our congregation, and they are ready to get on board and help with a substantial gift. Substantial gift I can't tell you what that is. You need to figure that out when you're talking about your need. And you have, go ahead.
Let me just follow up, because you said something I think is very important. Well, you said a number of things is very important, but one that was particularly striking is that if you don't meet your goal, it's difficult to come back from that. And there's a level of disappointment, perhaps disenchantment, alienation, and so on. So my question is this, is it, in your experience, based on what you know, is it best to perhaps shoot for a smaller figure and have two back-to-back campaigns? Or is there another way to put it? In other words, what is the downside to trying to successively run capital campaigns?
I think, did everybody hear the question? I think that the downside is you run the risk of what we call donor fatigue. So somebody has given, and now you're asking them again for the same type of thing. I'm all about asking somebody for a gift once they've given a gift, because it's much like in your business, it's a repeat customer. You want them to come back. To answer your question, the silent phase, and rather than think of it as a length of time, you can set, for a long time, the industry was suggesting that you set an 80% rule. So you raise 80% of your total goal before you go public. And when I mean public, I mean you go to the Post and Courier, you start, anybody that comes in to visit, the tourists, everybody, you tell them. That's what I mean by public. However, times have changed. Economic times have changed. It's a little harder to get to that 80% in a reasonable amount of time. So what we're recommending is 50%. So if you can get 50% of that raised, and it could be through a grant, it can be through a federal, whatever, it doesn't matter how you get that 50%. But if you can go to the public and launch the public part of your campaign with 50% raised, you're saying there's a really good chance, there's 50% chance that we're going to make this, and we need your help. So again, it needs to be internal. You need to decide on that number internally, what's best for your congregation. But it's much better to not publicize the campaign broadly until you raised at least 50% of what your goal is. And there's no shame in saying we're not there yet, we're not going to announce it. They don't know, right? They don't know that you didn't announce it when you said you were going to. So let's get back to preparing, being prepared. And internal preparations are very important. If your office looks like this, then you're probably not ready to do a capital campaign. I heard earlier Richard says about he's gone to some organizations, some congregations, and their records open a box somewhere. Get those out, go through them. That's the best source. Remember, your current customers are your best prospects. However, they might not have bought something from you for a long time. So you need to figure out who they are and go back and get organized and be able to have a database. If it's a Rolodex, that's great. If it's a computer spreadsheet, that's better. But it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. But you need a database, and you need to have somebody who's going to be in charge of keeping track of that database. Once you have those leaders identified and they're going out and talking to people, you need someone to keep track of who so-and-so has talked to so that you can follow up with them. And this may seem like you're putting the cart before the horse, but you need to have good records and good systems. And how are you going to thank someone who gives you $1 million? Have you thought about it? mean, after you jump up and down and give them hugs and you scream and all that, but what else, what are you gonna do besides that? You have opportunities for naming something. Are you gonna go there? Some organizations don't wanna have their congregation or organization filled with little plaques and such that say, this was made possible by a gift from Steffanie Dohn. Some do, some don't. So you have to think about that, and you have to, I mean, it's a great problem to have when you have a flow of checks coming in and we need to acknowledge all those people and thank them. It's a great problem to have, but it's something you really need to think through, and it's about being prepared and being ready to be able to ask somebody for a gift. And then the most important thing when they give you the gift is thanking them for the gift. My grandmother, who's now 101, sent me a check every year, still does, for my birthday. And I was in college, I was in my freshman year of college. And I thought, well, I'm a grown-up now, I don't need to write her a thank you note. But I'll make a phone call, I'll call her. So I called my grandmother, I call her Gummy, even though she has all her teeth. And I say, Gummy, thank you so much for the check, I really appreciated it. And I told her all the great things I was doing at college and how this would help and da-da-da-da-da. And she listened to me and she said, that's wonderful, dear, and I look forward to reading all about it in the thank you note you sent to me. Which was a life lesson. People want to be thanked. They want a thank you note. So you need to remember that and need to know how you're going to deal with it. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's get back to the Oprah. It's not Oprah, and it may not be the people that are tithing right now. So who is it? We talk about lead gifts, and this is something to think about in the silent phase of your campaign. Again, don't get it wrapped up with silent and public. Sometimes it happens all so fast you're doing both at the same. But the point is you are prepared and you're preparing. And as you're preparing and you go back to that need, how much do I need to raise? $100 billion. Well, it would be really helpful if we had a prospect, as a matter of fact, I had 9 prospects, that could give us $75 billion. That would only be $25 billion left. And I'm using preposterous numbers for this, but so the point is, if you need 3 gifts of $100, you should have 9 prospects that can give you, that have that capacity, that understand the need and urgency, and will give you $100. Does that make sense? Don't freak out if you don't have them. It's okay. But this is just the standard. This is just math. It's just going to work out to your advantage if you have 9 prospects for every lead gift that you want to raise. Does that make sense? Okay, now I want you to think about a time that you were completely irrational. You did something, you don't have to share it, but completely irrational. I mean, a pair of shoes you bought, a hat you bought, a jacket you bought, a spouse, something that was completely irrational. Everybody got something? Well, let's think about how you're going to, I'm not going to go, I just met Robert a minute ago, well, 40 minutes ago. Robert, would you please give me $1 million? No, you're supposed to say no.
Oh, no.
I'm a perfect stranger, why would he give me $1 million, right? So that's not what you want to do. You don't want to meet a perfect stranger and propose marriage to them. You might, but you don't say it out loud because you'll scare them away. But what you want to do is you want to build relationships. So think about being completely irrational. Falling in love is kind of like, you feel a little irrational sometimes if you've really fallen in love. I think giving is a little irrational also. I think the feeling you get and the feeling you need to evoke in order to get a gift is a little irrational. I say that because we work really hard, we save, and then we're asked to give it away. But that feeling, so intuitively, why am I doing this? But that feeling you get makes you want to do that again. Makes you want to fall in love again, give money again, buy a pair wear shoes again, etc. So building relationships with these prospects is the smartest thing you can do in the next 6, 8, 9 months that you're planning this campaign. And you're building relationships, much like you do when you fall in love. You need to create awareness. You want people to be aware of you, right? You want them to know about your congregation, about the history, why it's important, why we're the holy city, and why their help is going to help just boost that feeling that you feel when you fall in love. You want them to be aware of you. You want them to consider, when you were in first grade or 10th, I don't know, whatever grade you first fell in love, when you saw someone across the room, you wanted them to know that you existed, right? And when they didn't know you existed, you were crushed. You want them to know you exist. So once they become aware of you, you start planning things together. Would you like to come to the movies with me? Would you like to go to the aquarium with me? You start planning to do things together. And more often, would you like to meet my friends? Would you like to meet my parents? All these things that you're doing to court a person is the same thing you're doing when you're building in your silent phase of your campaign. When you're building these prospects, you're identifying the prospects, you're building the leadership, and you're getting the lead gifts you need to make this campaign successful. So you're planning things together, and then the ultimate irrational thing is you give it all away to somebody. My husband, I've given him my insurance policy, my house, my car, anything that happens to me, he gets it. Everything. I've given him everything. And that's because of the time we took to build a relationship together and fall in love. That's my view I'm giving. So think about how you felt when you did something irrational. It made you feel good, even if it was just temporary, even if when you got home and you wore those shoes and you realized that was the dumbest thing I ever did. For the moment, it felt good, right? Okay. So again, how do you get there? How do you build these relationships with these people? It's just 3 asks. That's all you have to do. It's very simple. You need to ask them to be aware of your need. Can everybody think about ways within their congregation that they can ask people to be aware of their need? And if you want to share some, please do. That one?
Bulletin.
Bulletin, right? You're asking them to be aware that even though they might not be able to see the need, again, Citadel Crisis Ministries, they might not be able to see what's going on, see the crumbling, see something that they can identify as, gosh, this place is they really need our help. You need to make them aware of it. This is still the silent phase of the campaign. Okay, you've done some preparation. You're not asking them in the bulletin to give a gift to the capital campaign yet. What you're asking them is to be aware that we are doing this because there's the need, there's the urgency, we know we can do it, we know that capacity, we know we can raise, we as a congregation can raise this money. And there's leadership, there's people, it's approved, and there's people, there's volunteers that are going to help you and ask you to join a team. I worked for a food bank in Connecticut. That was my first job out of graduate school as a volunteer coordinator. We had a walk against hunger. I'm not recommending you all do a walk against anything to raise money for a capital campaign, but what I'm saying is we as an organization, our organization is called Food Share. We're the food bank for Hartford and Talbot counties. We had over 200 programs that would come to Food Share in a year to get food to bring back to their groups. A lot of these were ministries, were church groups, were congregations, were synagogues. We had a walk against hunger that would raise money to support Food Share. And we raised a lot of money to support Food Share for a long time. We maxed out that at $250,000. So for 2 years, we raised that exact amount almost to the penny through our group, through our connections, our network, our supporters. We thought, this is never going to grow if we don't involve other people. So what we did is we made it an incentive for Asylum Hill Congregational Church, they were our biggest fundraiser, to form a team in their church to raise money for their feeding program at their church. They didn't want to raise money for food shares so much, but they wanted, as a team, as a group, as Asylum Hill Congregational Church in Hartford, Connecticut, West Hartford, Connecticut, they wanted to be known as the best fundraiser for the Walk Against Hunger, and they were. What they raised for us grew and grew and grew. And I'm still friends with, I still have colleagues in Connecticut, and now they're raising almost $750,000 through this Walk Against Hunger. And it's because of this team effort. The churches, the congregations formed teams they could rally behind. It's the same thing in your congregation. You're making them aware of the problem. You're asking them, not for a gift yet, but you're asking them to go to the aquarium with you, to meet your parents, to do things with you, to get to know you better, to get to know and love what's going on at the congregation. It's especially important for those that are not tithing now, because they don't have a relationship if they're not tithing, right? They're just using you. And they're a great source for this because they haven't had donor fatigue. They're right on in the middle ground where there's a lot of them maybe, and they're ready to get involved. So you ask them to join a team. It's back to that relationship part. And then this is the most important part, and you'll know when it's time, just like you knew it was time to ask that person out, to ask them to marry you, to buy that car or buy those shoes. You'll know it's the right time to ask them to consider giving to this important project. And at that time, you'll have the internal processes in place. So once they say yes, and you stop jumping up and down and hugging them, you can go back and thank them and figure out how you're going to build that relationship, because it shouldn't stop there. It should keep going, and you should keep building that relationship. Do you have any questions about the asks? Did you all know this already? It's the hardest thing, I think, in to learn, and not so much to learn, but to really feel confident that it's okay to ask people. It's okay to ask people. It's okay to fill out the application for a grant source. I would recommend that you make a phone call to that person first and ask them if they have time to discuss the project before you send it in. Identify a person in those large institutions and organizations that do support, there's a precedent, they do support these types of projects, but talk to them about yours in particular. That way, when your application crosses the desk, oh, I had a conversation with this nice person in Charleston, and that application will move from the no to the maybe, because they get a lot of them. But if you're building that relationship and putting in that time with a corporation, a foundation, or a person, they're going to consider your ask. They would, and that's all you're asking them to do. You're saying, please consider giving. You can say yes or no, right? So to wrap up, who are your best projects for your campaign? It's not Oprah, and she's sad about it. And it might not be those tithing. So the call to action for you is to find out who in your congregation is not active, and activate them. You know the people that are giving already, and you know that they will most likely support this project to the best of their ability. We know that because they have before, right? They have given to you before. They are supportive. They're there at every single activity you have, and they're always willing to volunteer. So we know about them. They're known. And I'm not saying they're not important. They're very important. I'm just saying they're not, probably not enough to get you where you want to be to that $100 billion goal. So you need to find out who else is the best prospect and what you can do to activate them. And if it takes a while to activate them, that's okay. So it's not those tithing. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Y'all ready to do a campaign now? I have a job already, I think. I have some of those jobs too.
You say there are groups that will go in and look at the congregation and look at this.
Yes, well, what they'll do is and I have, and I should say, Coastal Community Foundation doesn't do that kind of thing, so I'm not selling anything, I'm certainly not, I'm just speaking from my experience. But I do have a favorite local organization that I can share offline that does a feasibility study, and their specialty, and there's lots of them, their specialty is congregation-based fundraising for capital campaigns. What they do is they look at your donors, they interview people in the community, and they ask them questions. It's confidential, and they'll come back with, they won't tell you who they are because they can't, unless the person says, you can share my name and information. And 8 times out of 10, they will say you can share that information. But they will say, you're crazy if you think you're going to raise $100 billion in this congregation. It's just not there. Because they ask the person, what would you consider giving? Now, I'll tell you a story about our feasibility study for crisis ministries. We asked a person that we knew could give us about $500,000. Our consultant went and talked with her, and that we were miles apart. So the answer was, don't ask them yet. That's all you write, silent. And we didn't. We did a lot of awareness building, we did a lot of activities, we courted, we waited, we courted, we waited, and then at a planning activity we had for our board and for some other people and volunteers, and this person was not very engaged with us, but came. And when we went around the room and introduced everybody, that person said, I've been on the planning committee for this capital campaign. And that's when we knew it was time to ask. She was ready. That was time. And we did, and it was successful. So it's, again, there's no harm in waiting. It's better to wait than scare somebody